Let's examine the issue of debt owed by African countries and the call for cancellation and freeze. We're now being joined live from our Abuja studios by a developmental economist, Professor Ken Ife. Thank you for joining us on the News at 10.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
How would you react to this call for the cancellation of debt owed by African countries at this time? Do you think it's realistic?
It's excellent, it's realistic. In fact, that should be the starting point. This is a negotiation. You take extreme positions. You ask for total debt cancellation. They will say, well, we are prepared to talk about moratorium. Now, they've met us in between, somewhere in between, where they are prepared to forgive some of the debt service, not the principal. But what worries me about this is I can see the macroeconomic framework with which we are negotiating in the middle ground. UNECA says, one of the directors says, this should reflect on the depth of the crisis of the member states. I mean, if you look at America, America's intervention, 2.2 trillion, is 12% of their GDP. UK, 330 billion, that's 15% of their GDP. Japan, 20%. Where Nigeria, with our 3.5 billion plus trillion plus 500, is around 4%. So then if you look at other indicators like debt to GDP ratio, the total debt of the country, what are the framework? How are we going to do that? Okay, let's look at West Africa. The West Africa total GDP together is just over 600 billion, about 612 billion. The debt is about 220 billion. That's roughly 1/3. Nigeria obviously accounts for 66% of the whole GDP at $400 billion. But we also account to nearly half of the debt. But we're still around 20, just a little over 20% debt to GDP ratio. But there are countries like not Cote d'Ivoire, Cape Verde, that's 125%. And Ghana sits in the middle with 60% debt to GDP. But that's not the only measure. The deficit, all of us are in the red in the ECOWAS. But the best is actually Togo, which is less than -1. It's about -0.6. And Nigeria comfortably sits at about 3%, which is where the law says you can't exceed 3% deficit to GDP. But there is Ghana that's around 7%. So that's what I was saying. I was coming down to this. What are we using to negotiate? China says we are prepared to forgive, to move on the debt service, but not touching the principle at all. And they're even saying that it has to be on a case-to-case basis. So we need to have a framework, to make sure China doesn't tear all of us apart, because it's easier. It's easier for us to say in the middle ground, let's have refinance the debts at 0%. That means effectively waiving the debt service. And then from there, we'll begin to say, okay, if you won't have a 0 for everybody, refinance at 0, then additional debt at 0, then what are we talking about? And it's not unexpected, because the development finance institutions have cases where they do zero interest and 5-10-year moratorium. So I think we should, in that middle ground, we should press for that 0, and then while we are discussing that, find and develop some sound macroeconomic framework to apply that, rather than what China is trying to do.
Yeah, and you make a very strong case about this point of negotiation for African countries. Some are seeking a freeze of the debt, some are saying a not total cancellation, and then you don't think it would be unfair, to these institutions to have to forgive these debts? And besides, what negotiation? What point of negotiation are we arguing this from? What do we have as to advantage in this conversation?
Well, we're a weaker party in this negotiation, but there's a much more moral justification for us to ask for 100% debt cancellation. I mean, in 2005, there were debt cancellations of large magnitudes, except that Nigeria had to put 12 billion down to be able to get the 18 billion debt relief. So we have to ask, because the impact, is going to affect our trading relationships, our capacity to trade with the West and those other countries, and it's going to affect, it will just upset the whole economy, global economy as we know it. So we're moving into uncharted territory. So there's nothing wrong in asking. I'm pressing for that. And they themselves know that they need us as much as we need them. We are the last frontier, and we have the momentum in Africa in terms of growth, and we should press for the case. If they think otherwise, then we have a stronger case to trade more seriously among ourselves. Because at the moment, what we have is north-south trading relations rather than horizontal relations in the Africa configuration.
And what does it do to our economy if eventually we don't make a strong case for this, and even though we do make a strong case, these institutions refuse to grant debt relief?
No, I think we'll keep fighting because there are sympathies. The G20s have already agreed 1 year and with the option of 2 years. You just have to press because let me tell you the danger. If you don't negotiate that and then you have a higher degree of fiscal stress that can arise when you begin to have debt, the ranking goes down. Once you miss payments, your ranking will go down, and then it's more difficult for you to borrow more. Even if you borrow at a higher cost, and we can do with that. And look at the case of Nigeria. We know that our debt service is more like just over 2 trillion. If you remove that, then that nearly equates what we're expecting from oil. So if the crude can be offset by a postponement or a cancellation of the service, then, it is a neutral position for Nigeria. All we now do is to focus on all the other things that are emergent, which is the focus of the CBN-led effort of the private sector to capitalize the opportunities presented by COVID-19, and especially where the private sector says we want to float a $50 billion infrastructure company to take the bull by the horn and then support the whole effort. So there are many initiatives that are coming up. We've just seen the CBN launch their 3-year Marshall Plan. And it's very encouraging. And I think this is a...
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for interrupting.
But a big opportunity for Nigeria.
Great, indeed, and we do hope that everyone wins at the end of the day. Thank you again, Professor Ken Ife, a developmental economist, for joining us on the News at 10.